All right, what is good? Deepak Chona, Sportsmed Analytics, bringing you today's NFL injury updates. Thank you very much for joining. Now let's get it popping. Starting with Chris Godwin of the Buccaneers. Now we just found out he actually had 2 surgeries for his ankle fracture dislocation. Now typically this only takes 1 surgery, so it raises a little bit of a yellow flag there. We also saw Isaiah Pacheco and Mark Andrews both come back in the same season in the last couple years from a very similar type of injury. So altogether, the fact that Chris Godwin is not yet ready to practice with the team to start training camp is raising concern levels just a bit. The other thing we have to look at is that the team has knowledge of his injury and drafted Emeka Egbuka first round. The data already supported Godwin starting the season at only 80%, and that was in the absence of this second surgery, which we don't have a lot of information about quite yet. Now, we were expecting limitations. All of the events and news so far really strengthens that suspicion, so be a little bit cautious about investing in Godwin at wide receiver ADP 30, which is where he's going right now. Next up, we have Brandon Aiyuk. Now, they reported he is not on a timeline, and that's not indicative of a setback in most cases. Typically, the data for this ACL plus MCL type injury would have put him at late October, most likely. Either way, we were expecting him to start on the PUP. Certainly the comments do suggest that that's still the case. He is on the PUP, but he can come off of it in training camp anytime. However, the regular season PUP does mean missing 4 games, and that's most likely where you would see Brandon Aiyuk land. The other thing to think about is that when these wide receivers come back from major multi-ligament knee injuries, this is not just a clean ACL, remember. So when they come back, they average a 4 to 6 game ramp up, likely not seeing Brandon Aiyuk to look like his pre-injury self until the last third of the season here. Then we have Nick Chubb. Now this, as a Texans fan, I have to root for, but even if you look at just the data here, it's actually quite favorable. Now he had a foot injury last year that cut his season short, but the good news is that is not generally associated with a lasting performance dip into the following year. And the second aspect of this is that the multi-ligament knee injury that he had at the early 2023 season was projected to impact his performance pretty heavily throughout all of last year, and I think that's more or less what we saw. Now, the data here suggests that by the start of the coming season, he would be likely to have regained about 85% of his 2023 pre-injury form. And you have to remember, he was elite prior to going down with that multi-ligament knee injury. So these are huge injuries. This is his second one on the same knee, so we think that knee does not have a lot of longevity left in it. However, 2025, there is reason for optimism here based on the data from year 2 in multi-ligament knee injury recovery. Then we have Matthew Stafford. Now, this is just a precaution, at least according to the comments from the team in McVay. Back soreness is reportedly what he's dealing with. This could very well be a chance for a veteran to just sit out of an early phase of camp and get reps as he goes to keep his body feeling fresh. A little bit uncertain because we don't have much detail here, but worth monitoring for sure. Next up is Malik Nabers. Now, we were monitoring him from OTAs for a reported chronic toe injury. That chronic toe does raise concerns in general and does have a lingering risk, or at least potential risk in general as well. But importantly, he's avoided the PUP. He's reportedly already been working out, and there's some Instagram pictures to say the same. So overall, low concern for 2025 for Malik Nabers. Now, if Nabers participates fully in camp and doesn't miss time here, there would not be any lingering risk into the season that would be projected by the data. Then we have Stefon Diggs. So he is reportedly cleared for camp. He's been trending that way really the whole time, and we would strongly lean towards a week 1 return for Diggs. A couple things to keep in mind here. So he is over age 30. When wide receivers return from ACLs over age 30, the first 6 weeks, they do have a higher risk of mild soft tissue type injuries, things like hamstring strains, for example. And then secondly, he doesn't project to be immediately at pre-injury form. The data projects him at 85% week 1 and usually needs a 4-game ramp up to hit his 90%, where he looks like his old self. So Stefon Diggs, definitely some optimism here, but a little bit of caution is probably wise. Next up, we have Christian McCaffrey. So the data here is actually very promising. So he had returned to 4 receptions per game, 4 yards per carry type of form when he went down against the Bills after returning from his Achilles. And that PCL injury that he had during the Bills game isn't likely to linger in terms of performance impact. Now, Christian McCaffrey's, even in his Carolina days, had an extensive soft tissue injury history. And because of all that, in addition to his age, you're looking at, on average, about 2 times the typical risk of a running back. So with that in mind, week 1 does look very promising. And if you're drafting Christian McCaffrey, you can very easily get an Isaac Guerendo much later on and essentially guarantee yourself a RB2 floor as long as one of those 2 is on the field. Then we have J.J. McCarthy. So he is in line to take over the Vikings this year. We suspect what happened last year is that he had a meniscus repair, the meniscus being a shock absorber. So they repair it to try to stitch it back together and preserve it. But then sometimes that doesn't heal, and that can cause pain and swelling. And our suspicion is that that is what led to that second surgery, the trimming of his meniscus most likely. Now, the short-term data, if that were to be the case, strongly suggests that there's no lingering dip expected here by week 1. Then we have Justin Herbert. So Justin Herbert started last preseason with a diagnosis of plantar fasciitis. Then early on, he sprained his high ankle. And you have to think that limited his rushing ability for last year. First 6 games, he averaged 6 yards per game. The very next 6, he averaged 30. There are comments coming out of the Chargers camp that maybe Justin Herbert is going to be running more. And neither of those 2024 injuries and diagnoses that he had are likely to linger into the current season, and neither has any lingering impact on his mobility that's projected. So therefore, we do have some optimism that Herbert rushing ceiling might increase. Next up, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, he had reportedly a knee cleanup surgery. Usually those are arthroscopic surgeries, minimally invasive, trying to either trim a meniscus or a cartilage type injury. Not ideal for the long term, but definitely not death sentence by any means. In general, the data favors a return to 100% pre-injury form pretty rapidly here, so we don't really have major reason for risk for 2025. Then we have Daniel Jones. Now, this is an interesting one. You have to look at his 2024 stats with a little grain of salt. If you go back to 2022, he ran for 700 yards, 7 touchdowns. And then in 2024, he had a career low 4 yards per carry. Now, consider that in late 2023, he had his ACL torn. And that, for most quarterbacks, would hamper your rushing ability for the next year. So with that in mind, the year 2 data does generally see a return to their baseline level for rushing. And therefore, Daniel Jones, we have a little bit of optimism that his fantasy relevance can increase. Next up, Cooper Kupp. So Cooper Kupp didn't have the greatest season. Of course, he started very strong in 2024, had 110 yards and touchdown right away, and then week 2 had a bad high ankle. It looked like he had bounced back to some degree, but then his performance tanked at the end of the season, raising the risk of, is he washed or is it just re-injured? And it's really hard to know that, to be honest, at this point. We have a little bit of optimism that Cooper Kupp may not be totally washed, just based on the fact that he did start very strong just 1 year ago today. So with that in mind, he's a high-risk player, but you'd also get him at a low ADP. Kenneth Walker is the next on our list. He had a groin injury at the end of minicamp. It's really worth monitoring closely because he has a real history of soft tissue injuries. Now, the most likely outcome here is that he's fully active and without any issues, but Kenneth Walker, you have to think that every week that he misses, if he were to miss any training camp, it increases his in-season re-injury risk by about 5%. So keeping in mind that Kenneth Walker is starting at a little bit of an elevated baseline for injury risk anyway, this may not be nothing. Then we have Ricky Pearsall, and a lot more optimism here than his 49ers teammates. He did start on PUP, which is a little bit of a surprise, but he can come off of it basically at any time. The comments from Kyle Shanahan suggest that this is actually just a planned stint on the PUP and that he will be tested in conditioning extensively for about 3 days. And then after that, he's expected to come off. He had a hamstring strain back in the OTA minicamp time about a month ago. And those by themselves wouldn't predict any increased in-season re-injury risk. The only exception to that is if they cause serious missed time in camp. And so similar to Kenneth Walker, we got to watch out for Ricky Pearsall on this one. And then last but not least, TJ Hockenson. So he had a multi-ligament knee injury late 2023, and therefore you can't really look at last year's stats as being reflective of his true abilities. So in most cases, tight ends would return to form in year 2 post-injury, which for Hockenson would be this coming year. There's a lot of changes in that offense, certainly, and it's a little bit hard to really assess where he was pre-injury even, because he had switched teams right before. So with all that in mind, we do have optimism that he's in an elite offense with a great offensive play caller, and he is likely being undersold right now because of last year's down performance, but that probably was heavily influenced by the injury. And that's all we got for today. Make sure to keep tuning in, drop your questions in the comments, and we will catch you soon.